want to talk to you about the nutritional part of the program. And as you know, the ones that deal with me in here know that that's my button. That's what hits me. And you also know that I believe in taking tissue samples, because I think tissue samples really explain what that crop is doing in the course of a growing season. And believe me, getting up here is no easier every year. After doing this for 22 years, it still gets pretty tough. Each of you in this room have a very positive influence in your operation, or you wouldn't be here. With that said, you've all probably seen this somewhere in a magazine or seen it here at this meeting, but the 4 R's are still hold true: the right source, the right rate, the right time, and the right placement. As we look at fertility in corn and soybeans and nutrient mobility, I want you to keep in mind the 4R practices that help guide you in making important decisions for your crops. Maximize nutrient efficiency. We've all heard about efficiency, but what is it? These 4 things are asked you as questions that pertain to your operation. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to hit on some tried and true agronomic principles and concepts that you can apply as you prepare crop plans for 2020. I put together some information that I think will get you readily thinking about ways you can maximize your operation. Like I said, these bullets are phrased as questions. Nutrient mobility in soils. What is that? Let's look at different elements we just asked about. Some of these are standard on soil tests, some are not. All are critically important to profitable crop production. Immobile elements are highly attracted or held to the soil, and movement is very slow and sometimes years with these elements. Plant availability is largely influenced by soil pH and temperature, microbial activity, and placement. Of these, we typically test for P, which is phosphorus, and zinc on a soil test. The last several years, we have shown you where your levels on your soil test of these 2 items have fallen or declined, and that's because of crop removal and yield. But we have talked about nutrient mobility in soils quite a bit in the past. Right now, I'd like to talk more about nutrient mobility within the plant and how much these can change. One simple rule of thumb is that in general, nutrients are mobile in the soil and are immobile in the plant. Last year we discussed in detail nutrient mobility in the soil. This year I'd like to talk with you more in depth about nutrient mobility within the plant and why it is important for your operation. What is nutrient mobility? Nutrient mobility is relative captive for plants to reuse nutrients by transporting them between plant tissues within the plant. The green double-sided arrows show the nutrients that are able to be transported within tissues in the plant. These elements are nitrate, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, zinc, molybdenum, and chloride. The red boxes show nutrients that once taken into the plant, they will stay there and are not able to be moved elsewhere. These nutrients are boron, sulfur, ammonium, iron, copper, and calcium. I know that's a big list, but there are a few I want to highlight on to view differently on how you use them in your operation. Boron, as we discussed, is very mobile in the soil, but is very immobile in the plant. What does this mean for us? Since boron is often associated with good tip fill, pollen, tube development, it can be critical to keep a constant supply in the soil, making split applications beneficial. Sulfur also does not easily translocate from older leaves to young new growth, and with the decrease of acidity in our rainfall, we are seeing continued need for and a positive response to additional sulfur in fertilizer. As you all well know, you'll hear me say, every time you make a trip across the field with some kind of fertilizer, you ought to have some sulfur in there. You've heard that I've talked about protein today, what I'd like you to remember is that when you think protein, think test weight in your grain, because that's what sulfur does. You've heard that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link and is overlooked. Sulfur can become that in a fertility program. The mobility of sulfur in the soil and the immobility in the plant makes it a critical nutrient to ensure we are keeping an eye on and making sure the plant can access it when needed. So pick up your phones again, as you all have done, and it looks like you're 100% right. It's in the new growth. You all have this handout on your table. This is a very complicated chart, but it gives you an idea of what a plant uses and needs. This shows where certain nutrient deficiencies show up in the plant, which is directly related to how these nutrients can translocate within the plant. Thinking of nutrients in terms of how they move or don't move in the plant. If you start to notice deficiency symptoms during the growing season, this approach will help you differentiate what your plant might be lacking. This is where I'm saying, this is where a tissue sample is very important. One key thing to remember is that immobile nutrient deficiencies will be showing up in young tissue, and mobile nutrients will display themselves in the older, more mature tissue first. An easy way to think of this is to consider something you have all seen, which is a corn crop firing yellow up from the bottom, lower leaves, pulling nitrogen from the bottom of the plant to supply the new growth which it needs to maintain production. We also need to remember that subtle deficiencies won't always show up visually, but can actually be sufficient yield limiting factors in the plant, especially on the farm where you're looking for high management yield goals. One way to get ahead of this is to use tissue sampling, as well as making sure you are co-applying critical plant nutrients in your plant food. We printed this nutrient deficiency symptom chart that you can take home if you'd like, but really, it can be very complicated. The key thing to remember is that this is what your Willard rep is available for. This is a preliminary driving factor for our finisher side dress blends, as well as our starter blends, ensuring your crop gets a balanced fertility plan before it is in need of rescue, which I'll talk more about. Our second bullet question: am I applying the correct nutrients together to maximize uptake and conversion to yields? Now we're going to talk about how you can efficiently co-apply key nutrients in your crop to maximize usage of what you are pulling down and transfer that to bushels. Whip out those personal devices again. And I'm going to ask you two questions here. Two of the most important elements in a starter fertilizer are something's not showing up, Mike. Suppose you got 13, right?
I forgot to take this off.
There you go. The correct answer here is phosphorus and zinc. While nitrogen is also an important part of this, the ratio between zinc and phosphorus can be crucial in their efficiency. Question 2. Four of the most important elements to balance a band side dress solution fertilizer are, there's your choices: nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, zinc, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, nitrogen, potassium, boron, and sulfur. Well, we really did good on this one. This is great. This is our finisher product that we've been selling for the last 4 years. 4 years. And we have seen tremendous results from it. And a lot of you are using it, as you can see here. So let's dig into these a bit more. The point of this little quiz was to reiterate that every operation is different, and to understand how these work together, you really need to sit down with your Willard rep and go through your soil reports and cropping systems for 2020 and beyond. Looking at nutrient relationships, we know that not having the right ratios of nutrients can actually be detrimental. I try to think of nutrient ratios similar to maintaining a good balanced diet. Phosphorus and zinc are a good example of this. Zinc works hand in hand with phosphorus to play an essential role in ATP and protein synthesis, which is why it is key to put them together in a ratio that supports their uptake in the plant. Let's think of the energy in a plant, and zinc supports a healthy plant. Think back to the image of the picture that Jamie showed with the difference between Willard starters and Biogrowth paired together can make on corn. Looking at nitrogen and sulfur, both of which are critical in protein synthesis information, if we run out of S, we significantly degrade plants' ability to continue to build protein. When I say build protein, I'm thinking of test weight. If you think about sulfur in soybeans, you may want to consider its role in aiding the plant's ability to conduct nitrogen fixations. Looking now at the relationship between boron and nitrogen, we remember that similar to sulfur, boron is highly mobile in the soil, but immobile in the plant. Remember, when you think about boron, think about tip fill in corn and pod fill in beans. Our Willard blends take these relationships into account, ensuring we are placing a balanced diet out there for the crop to use most efficiently. So all that sounds good, but what does it really mean? What does it really look like? How do I visualize, remember all this information you're throwing at me? We all like steak, or I guess we all like steak, except Stacy. Stacy doesn't like steak. So, but I know most of the people, probably 99% of them here do. Well, let's look at this delicious steak. Well, as good as this looks, I view this steak like only putting out a single nutrient. For this case, let's say this is nitrogen. Let's get more specific and say that it's 30% liquid nitrogen. This is great. Plants need nitrogen, but if you eat every day your whole life, you might experience some negative effects. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy the red meat as much as anybody. And it's not a good balanced diet. Now let's look at this balanced meal in comparison. We've still got our steak, but now we've added some other protein and fat sources, with as well as some vegetables, a little bacon. Everybody loves bacon, so you might prefer to add some potatoes, gravy, peas, or carrots to this. But overall, the balance is critical. When I look at this, I see the left side dressing with straight liquid 30% and dry urea, and on the right would be a side dress with our finisher products that contains balanced nutrition for your crop. Our third bullet point, are my nutrients available in significant quantities during peak demand? Now let's discuss timing. If the nutrients are available when it's most important for your crop. You've probably seen this picture before in some of our meetings. The thing you probably haven't seen is where we've really laid out where the peak uptake is. Here's a graph showing the nutrients uptake curve on 200 bushel corn. You can see the key period of rapid uptake in this very short time frame, which is right in that red box. Guys, if you don't understand this slide, basically it says nutrient demands are highest peak in a very small window. And when you get over 200 bushel corn, this all changes. You actually take up more potash than nitrogen. For every pound of potash or nitrogen, you take about 1.4 pounds of potash at this period. Very important. So we need to make sure we have these nutrients there. That is another reason why we come up with a finisher for corn. Remember the 4 R's on this. And my last bullet point are my applications uniform. This is probably a sore subject with some people, but it is the truth, and we've seen it all. If you don't think so, look at some of these wheat fields now with the streaking in them. Am I going to talk about uniform application? Yes, and why it's important and how we can impact your bottom line. I want to show you this graphic to illustrate why we think the uniform of banding liquid nutrients instead of broadcasting dry might be able to help you put dollars back in your bottom line. This is from a study conducted at Iowa State University. This study was conducted on a brand new liter L4500G spreader bed, calibrated for a 50-foot swath, and was looked across at different spread volumes. The brew spread line, which is at the very bottom, was done at 54 pounds to the acre. The red one, which is the middle line, was done at 108 pounds, and the green spread at the top was done at 216 pounds. You can see here the availability of a dry broadcast spinner across 50 feet and how the variability amplifies as the rate increases. This was a blended fertilizer. Let me walk you through this chart and exactly what it's showing. From the center point, which is right there, to outside 25 feet at 2.5 feet out from center, this spreader was 91 pounds off target. My point here is that no matter what they did, it was nearly impossible to get this variation calibrated out of the machine. Different densities of fertilizers just spread differently. Now, this specific study on dry broadcast fertilizer, but you can also easily see where this could be even more amplified with other products such as manure. So let's dig a little deeper. Now, showing in comparison to a liquid application in the lower right chart in a study from Kansas State, you will see the variation across a liquid fertilizer boom at 3.4%. We had a 30% variation in the dry one. That is important. That is improvement of 30% over uniformity simply by changing the method of application. That is some interesting data, but what can we do with it? How do we put this into dollars and cents? Most of you have seen this. This is a productivity chart from Willard's IQ showing yield and uniformity. Over 18 years of collecting community data, which we have collected with IQ in the Mid-Atlantic region, and comparing uniformity of crops to yield return using our IQ data on wheat as an example, we know that for every percent point increase in uniformity on average, yields increase 1.3 bushels. We would call this one of our known knowns, improving yield while reducing risk. What I want to drive home here is that you need to control the controllable when possible. This is something where you can control the uniformity on your operation, and this is one example of a way that you can work to increase overall uniformity, percentage of your fields to increase yields. So these are the full 4 bullet points that I wanted to bring to your attention. Now that we've talked about some agronomic principles and revisited some basic of nutrition utilization, I'd like to discuss some ways that Willard has utilized these concepts with great results in the past years. But first, let's talk about banding. And this is not the banding I'm talking about. It's likely you've heard your Willard rep talking about banding. You might have even heard some of Mike's corny jokes about it. It's never been cooler to be a part of the band, or don't miss the bandwagon. But it's also possible you didn't get what the big deal is. The reality is that we have been doing banding for quite a while, and isn't new technology. In fact, Willard has been working with growers using banding fertilizer in 2x2, doing band side dress application for many years with great results. What we are talking about is taking the same banding technology we've been doing for years with a few small changes in timing and placement to help you realize increased fertilizer efficiency, and at the end of the season, increase the bushels and in your bottom dollar. So what does banding look like? We are placing concentrated stream of nutrients on 30-inch centers, which forces nutrients deep into the soil profile into the root zone, similar to the way we've done on our finisher side dress products for years. These concentrated bands of nutrients are allowing P and K specifically to stay more mobile in the soil solution, therefore keeping plant available much longer than, say, compared to broadcast application. In some areas, we are seeing great benefits from also banning nitrogen when the conditions aren't as conducive to a side dress trip in season. This is why our finisher side dress works better than spun dry fertilizer or straight 30% nitrogen. If you really look at this, this is where we're talking about. This is the banding, this is the surface banding, and this is the root zone banding. I want to share with you why it's important to understand the placement of nutrients and understanding saturation and concentration. This graphic explains why nutrient uptake is improved when fertilizer is surface banded in a reduced till environment instead of broadcast. You can see how the nutrients move deeper into the soil profile when surface banded is it at about 50 times more concentrated than when it was broadcasted. Even after the band is incorporated with a reduced tillage implement, nutrients remain concentrated. The high concentration of nutrients tends to force nutrients deeper into the soil profile. Fixing capacity of the soil becomes overloaded, allowing even phosphorus and potassium, which are considered immobile, to move deeper. Deeper nutrients will provide nutrients during periods of peak demand. This is all great, but why should I ban nutrients? Banning creates dense patches of nutrients that cause roots to prolific, increase in numbers into the zone of high nutrient concentration, resulting in nutrient uptake per root area. Here's our summary data showing our additional university data as well as our own internal data from this past year. Based on this data, we see a 10.5 bushel average difference when comparing the same total amount of plant food and simply just changing the application method of fertilizer. This is something you can easily do within your system to reduce risk, improve yield with no additional cost to you. But you do have extra costs here because you're going to have it in the application. This is requiring one more application. Delmarva is something that can really make a difference for all of you guys running back through with urea, AMS, and potash. How will this benefit me and my crop? So let's do a quick recap. What does banning do for me as a grower? Zones of high nutrient concentration are produced, which improve nutrient use efficiency and offer 4 important benefits listed here. Increased root uptake, reduction in fixation of phosphorus and potassium, reduction in nitrogen loss, enhancement of phosphates uptake by roots via more nitrogen. So this is going to increase yields? The answer is yes. We have seen this work consistently on our finisher side dress, as the data show its effectiveness in the past several years, and we believe this will likely have a fit in your operation. Earlier you saw a graph of yield progression over the past 20 years. Now we have improved over time, and how we have improved over time. We believe fertilizer banning is one of the next steps to take your operation over its plateau and make the next step to increase yield and increase fertilizer use efficiency. With that, do I have any questions? I know I threw a lot at you, but as we get to those higher plateaus, and I've seen some yield goals of some people in the next 5 years up to 350 bushel, we've got to change the ways we think here a little bit. We can't fertilizer for 200 bushel corn and expect to get 350. So what are we going to do to change that? This is one of the ways we think by making these concentrated bands of fertilizer will help. it's something that's not new, but it's new to what we've been doing because we're growing a lot more yields. The second year I come to work for Willards, which was 36 years ago, we did banding in 30-inch strips. But then we was averaging, if I believe I'm right, and Bobby, you tell me if I'm wrong, I think we was only averaging about 120 bushel corn. That was about it. This way definitely does see, and some of you are doing some side dress banding. It's just a different way to keep those nutrients intact. And with the regulations coming down, and you all know what we're playing with regulations as far as nutrient management, we've got to do a better job and figure out ways to get over that. We don't have the luxury of these 6-foot topsoils and things like that, so we've got to do a better job of managing what we're putting out there. This is truly what Willards is all thinking about. We are nutrition people. We are not seed sellers. I like to know the number of times that Bobby has come to me and said we need to be selling seed over the last 30 years. And I've always backed him down, because to sell seed, you got to sell seed. To sell fertilizer and nutrition, you got to sell that, because that's what you got to be good at. And with that, I'm done. Michael, thank you.